Yeah, please, yeah. It's good to promote it anyway. It's put the link out there. It's all in English.
Yes.
We have also special guests from
It's
not you only.
otherwise.
Somebody living 300 years ago.
The project was
Who lived 300 years ago. Very famous.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's universal, right? Morning, how are you?
Someone else. Neanche delle associazioni.
C'è Vincent.
Devo fare anche lo spot nei 10 minuti.
No, no.
Allora lo fai tu.
No, non lo fa.
Io dico che la società ha ragione,
Ringraziate la società del giorno.
Ringraziamo.
Potete andare.
Okay, good morning everybody. Because we are also broadcasting. Okay, good morning everybody. First of all, many thanks to la Società della Ragione organizing this meeting together with ENCO, the European Coalition for Just and Effective Drug Policies. My name is Enrico Fletcher. I'm an Italian journalist trying to take my country out of the actual drug policy misery. I strongly believe that despite the current crisis of the United Nations, just and effective drug policy are still possible beyond the demagoguery which is the base of the current legitimacy problems of the global drug control system. As a matter of fact, by the entrance, I saw a very nice poster inciting the people to cry loud the no to corruption. As a matter of fact, corruption is a banquet on which relies the actual drug control system. This fact has been very well studied during the alcohol prohibition, which was launched just before the US intervention in the First World War. Beer being strongly associated with the Germans in that case, cannabis with Mexicans, opium with Chinese laborers, and cocaine and heroin in the black communities. There are many examples of racism and prohibition being strongly connected. But in our event, open to contribution to all the participants, which I really pledge for, would be aspire to analyze this phenomena as being structural and not depending on rotten apples. Almost 300 years ago, the Dutch philosopher Baruch Spinoza wrote some remarks on prohibition that are still valid today. Whoever tries to determine everything by law will provoke vices rather than correct them. What cannot be prohibited must necessarily be permitted, even if harm follows. Many people have tried to prevent these problems with moral laws and other kinds of regulation, but without success. Rules that, like that cannot and don't restrain human appetites. They usually make them stronger. The reason is simple. Any law you can break without harming anyone else ends up being treated like a joke. And we are drawn to what we are told we cannot have. We chase the forbidden and desire what is denied. People with time, money, and connections are especially good at finding loopholes. They can't always work around laws that aim to police things that cannot be banned outright: feasts, entertainment, luxury, and similar pleasures. When it's only the excess that's harmful, and excess depends on each person's situation. That's why it can't be fixed by one-size-fits-all laws. Thank you very much. I pass the word to Vincenzo Scalia. Is a criminologist teaching at the university of Florence. He's a long-time friend of mine, but he's also writing in lots of articles in papers and entering also in the actual Italian situation. Thank you.
Recording in progress.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today, so many of you. And the point I want to raise, or the points better, revolve around the apparent ineffectiveness of drug control. There is a paradoxical aspect in this. That is, the more the governments pass more and more restrictive and repressive law on drugs, the more drugs keep being problems. A problem of public order, a problem of racism, for example, a problem of public health. But is it really ineffective, or maybe there is another kind of effectiveness we should look at? For example, under the aspect of ineffectiveness, it's quite obvious that drug policies, current prohibitionist or prohibitionist-oriented drug policies are totally ineffective. For example, they say we need to enforce more repressive drug laws to fight the mafias. Well, at the beginning were the Marseille Mafia and then the Sicilian Mafia. As a Sicilian, I don't know something about the topic. Then now we have the Sicilian Mafia, the Calabrian Drangheta, the Neapolitan Camorra in Italy, but we have the Mexican narcos, the Colombian narcos, and we have the Chinese Mafia, and we have the Golden Triangle. So looks like the mafias have been thriving upon the illegality of drugs. Then the issue of reducing arms. Are we sure that by forbidding the use of drugs we reduce harms? No, it doesn't look like it. Looks like more and more people dies. And do we reduce Do we reduce street crimes? No. Street crimes are still there. And do we discourage consumption? Well, following the path drawn by Enrico, that drew his inspiration from Spinoza's words, Spinoza's sentences, everything that is prohibited will be sort of inspire shortcuts for alternative use, alternative consumption. So we say, if we look at the issue of drug policies or anti-drug policies under the aspect of ineffectiveness, the answer is yes, they are ineffective. But probably they are not so ineffective as we think. Probably they are effective. There is another aspect of effectiveness. They are effective insofar as, and here we keep on following the path of citation, but we are Italians and we are used to that style. As Foucault would say, insofar as they reinforce power, governmentality, there is the issue of biopolitical power at stake. So the first point, the issue of drugs has become a topic by which so-called dangerous classes are controlled. For example, we've just been to a conference, we just attended the conference this morning before coming here, and we noticed that in the US, African Americans are more and more associated with either drug pushing or drug use, and they swell the ranks of inmates. In Italy, it's the same, that 25% of inmates are all drug users. I know, Italy is a higher figure than any other country in Europe in relation to this aspect, but still the percentage of drug users who are being jailed is more or less consistent across the Western world. If you want, at large, it's not a matter only of dangerous classes. Yes, dangerous classes, as Enrico pointed out, we see the Epstein files, you have the Lolita Express trains, and these exclusive resorts where one could have sex, drugs, and all the prohibited, also immoral fun they wanted. But think of the excuse that was provided by drug trafficking to inspire Mr. Donald Trump, to invade Venezuela on the 3rd of January. And now he wants to promote an American alliance, a South American alliance that concerns Colombia, Ecuador, Bolivia. Under the excuse of drugs, you have the control of countries that are not in line with your policies. This is a tradition that in the US has been very common for the last 50 years. Think of the Operation Condor, not Plant Condor. In order to uproot a marijuana plantation in Mexico, the DEA basically sided the Mexican police, and then you have the Plan Merida. And what's the effect? The effect is that the American government plays a capital role in shaping the drug policies of these countries, also by creating a military patrol. And the Plan Colombia in late 1990s, promoted by Bill Clinton. So it's a way of controlling countries that are politically not in line with American policies, but also to control so-called dangerous classes. For the case of Italy, you have migrants, you have Rome, or to associate the use of drugs with some groups such as LGBTQIA+, or is the pretext, for example, the excuse to close down alternative experiences because they see in Italy we have social centers, say that is a location where drug is cultivated and sold. I think of the of Leoncavallo or the alternative social centers these days. Another aspect is that of reinforcing securitarianism, because of course there is a sort of vicious circle, because the use of drug triggers the need to get money to buy drugs, particularly in lower marginal groups. So it triggers street crimes, and street crime triggers other kind of violent crimes. So the city or cities are presented as a mess, requiring special squads, over-professionalized, over-intolerant against the people they are supposed to control, and by this token, a securitarian discourse takes place and is legitimized, because the point is, if we don't act tough, in a tough way, act with a zero tolerance attitude, this will end up ruining our cities, our nations. And then you have, of course, the legitimization of power, of political power. Nowadays, political powers of single countries are empty. Why? It's hard to decide anything in foreign policies, because decisions are made somewhere else. It's hard to decide economic policies. And the case of Italy, unfortunately, Italy sets the standards for the worst thing, like we did with fascism, is typical. The Italian government doesn't decide anything. The only way to gain political consent is that of enforcing law and order politics. And they are exploiting this aspect at their best. They're making the most of it. And lastly, let me say, without drugs, all those so-called NGO and volunteers who work in the direction of taking care of drug users, what would they do? What would they do? So you see, in a way, drug policies are effective. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those excellent speeches. I was pleased to be invited to speak on this event because one of my favourite topics is corruption, having come across corruption a great deal whilst working as an undercover police officer. But let me tell you the day when I became obsessed with corruption. I was working undercover trying to infiltrate the periphery of an organised crime group called the Bestwood Cartel. And I'd spent many weeks manipulating some young man into being my go-to person, my introducer, to get me introduced to the specific gangsters. But one day I was most upset because he got arrested. Now this young man was on bail for dealing heroin already, and he was caught for dealing heroin, so I thought he's not going to get bail. So for me this was a catastrophe because I'd put weeks and weeks of work into developing my relationship with this young man, and suddenly he was in the jail, which isn't very helpful. So I was chatting with some of his friends in Nottinghamshire, in the town centre there, and suddenly I saw him walking towards me, and I'm thinking, there's no way he should have got bail. No way. How on earth has he got bail? And I looked at his friends' faces, and they're thinking exactly the same thing. How has he got out? So he looked very sheepish, and he came up to us and he says, "You'd never guess what's just happened to me," he said. When I was in the police cell, and I knew the source handlers were going to come in and see me, because they always do, but this time they said to me, "You can either give us some information, or we'll let everybody know that you did." I was like, wow, okay. So what did you say? And he says, "Well, I couldn't tell them anything, could I? Because I didn't know whether they were working for the same people I work for. So there's no way I'm going to tell them anything." So he was in a panic to get out and try and tell his version of the story before those police officers told everybody that he was a police informant. So in the discussion for the planning of this event, we had some real discussion about the difference between systematic corruption, the unintended consequences, which is noted on the flyer, and the systematic financial corruption that comes from the infiltration of organised crime. But to me, this event was the perfect meeting point between those two types of corruption. There's the noble cause corruption from those police officers who are stepping over the line because they think they need to step over the line in order to get the job done, and his fear of the intrinsic systematic corruption caused by organised crime. So it was quite a moment for me, and that day, really, I became absolutely obsessed with trying to understand corruption from both sides. So I spent the last decade or so, wherever I've been in the world and whoever I've been speaking to try and further that understanding. And much of that has been speaking to other police who have also similarly come face to face with corruption, and also speaking to many police officers who have been themselves embedded in that noble cause corruption, or specifically a victim of it. And one example of someone who's a victim of it is a good friend of mine who was a very high up handler of informants. And the handling of police informants within the drug markets is the most furtive ground for corruption of all sorts. It's where organised crime recruit police officers as much as police officers recruit drug dealers for information sharing, so to speak. Now, in his role within the Metropolitan Police, he'd spent years investigating organised crime at the very highest level, international level. But it was at the moment where he tried to expose corruption within the Metropolitan Police that he said it was the first time in his life he'd become fearful of his life, where he actually thought he was going to get murdered, where he was spotting surveillance, and it ended up that an entire police unit was tasked with doing a full surveillance. But I mean full surveillance, I mean 6 cars and a motorbike plus attached foot foot officers as well, so a full surveillance team which had been tasked to keep an eye on him as a response to him trying to expose systematic corruption. So it's like a snake which eats its own tail sometimes, in the fact that the systems are not set up to even respond as the public might wish to deal with this corruption. But one of the key questions, I think, reflects what Enrico says in the introduction. Quite often I get asked the question, well, why are you saying that prohibition specifically creates this corruption as opposed to normal policing practices? And it comes down to reflect one of the quotes at the beginning of this session, and that is that policing was never meant to deal with prohibition. It was never designed that way. The first principle of policing is the preservation of life, and it should remain so always as a basic first principle. Prohibition interferes with that principle. There are two types of laws. There is malum in se and malum prohibitive. Malum in se is laws which are about things which are wrong in themselves. They're inherently wrong. If you hit someone, it's clearly wrong. If you steal from someone, it's clearly wrong. If you murder someone, it's clearly wrong. But a law which is based on a moral judgment not only has severely damaged policing like a cancer, it also affects the mentality of police officers who are tasked to police these moral judgments. Because you can spot a criminal behaviour, you can understand a crime which is wrong in itself. You can understand that if a crime is reported to you of burglary or an assault, clearly you can follow an evidential set of rules and investigate that objectively. But if you're tasked with policing a moral judgment, you are invited to form that moral judgment. That becomes part of the system. And you have to decide who is the immoral person. Who is that person? It's those other people. It's those people. Those people who are not my people. Because that moral judgment in being invited creates that cancer, that judgment. And in so doing, the problem is with prohibition, as has already been pointed out by Vincente, it just goes on. There's no end to it. There's no solving of a crime that's been reported to you with a satisfactory conclusion. All you are seeing as a police officer is the ever-expanding nature of organised crime, the increasing violence of organised crime. And in fact, the tools used by police, which I've referred to already, the use of police informants, is the principal driver of that violence. It's the most significant influence of growing organised crime violence. Because that violence is designed to deter people, to grasp them up. So if you have the presence of police spies in your community, that is what drives that intimidation. That is what drives the need to be able to intimidate. So that you are the person not grasped up and someone else gets grasped up instead. So this perpetual, increasing nature of the violence is a great pressure for the individual cop who is tasked with this moral judgment. It's a pressure for them, and that is what drives the moral, that's what drives this noble cause corruption. Because if you're seeing just spiralling violence and crime and the ever-growing power of organised crime, what do I do about it? What can I do? I must do more, I must do more. And that is what invites this noble cause corruption, this bending of the rules. Now, the really scary thing is, the thing that we need to be aware of, is that noble cause corruption is a principal recruiting ground for organised crime. Organised crime specifically look for those cops who are trying to hard and bend the rules in order to manipulate them and flip them into the other side of corruption. Because once you've got someone on record breaking the rules, they're yours to play with. And this all has its foundation in prohibition, which should never have been a policing issue. Thank you.
At the end, I will count many things that are connected with drug policy, consequences, efficiency, and corruption. I'm a mathematician. So in Europe, we have two tools to evaluate the efficiency of supply drug. So the drug that is want to supply, so want to reduce the supply of drugs. And we have the estimate of the effectiveness of supply reduction measure and estimate of market value. Of course, is the black market. And then we have also the possibility to analyze qualitatively some consequences, and also we have from a big project, big international project that was called ELIS-REP, a survey on prisoners incarcerated for drug offering, and on corruption. Here is just the laws in Italy. We have we have 3 laws in the last 30 years, and the repressiveness of the laws were evaluated inside the big international project quantitatively. And you see that in general, the first law was the mildness, the second one the most repressive, and the third one is something in the middle. Because something is also linked to these laws. Then we, in order to evaluate the supply reduction, we can use the prison incidence, so the number of persons entering in prison. I will go rapidly, but this is the last chapter in this book. And in particular, analyzing all the entrants, we can see that half of the entrants in Italy are related to anti-drug laws. So half of the prisoners, half of those entering in prison are due to the anti-drug laws. And here is the prevalence, and of course there is something like that in 2006 because there was a pardon. But also prevalence, half of the prevalence is due to anti-drug laws. And what can we evaluate using prevalence and incidence is the average duration of imprisonment. And you see that the 3 laws have an effect because the mildest are, there are duration slower, in the middle law there are in the middle, and the most repressive law there are higher in higher median, higher average duration of imprisonment. Wow. If you want to analyze the efficacy of repression, you can estimate, this is a mathematician question, you can estimate using the double entering in prison. So we have some person that enter more time during 1 year. And having this data, you can estimate how is extensive the work, the worker in the market of drug. And estimating, you can see there, the number of estimating is the line, is more than 10 times the number of prison. So this means that the efficacy of the repression is about 5-10%, between 5 and 10%. So this means that 90% of the worker in the market of drug is free. And this is can be also seen here are the two repressive measures, that is the prevalence, so in percentage of the person, just the prosecution by police, and the percentage of those entering in prison. They are different because you can have many prosecution and lower prisoner. And another thing should be the effect on the black market. And the effect on the black market can be measured by the price. Here we have a period of 11 years from 2012 to 2022. And here there is the higher price drug, that is cocaine, and the lower price, that is hashish and marijuana. And you see how the price per dose go during this period. And what is clear, that the highest price drug, cocaine, during this 11 year, increased just 18%, while the inflation is 27%. So the increase in the price of the higher drug, cocaine, is lower than the inflation. And even more for what concerns marijuana and hashish, because marijuana increase of 11.6%, and hashish is decreasing. And so there is no efficacy, because if the police is efficient, the price should increase. And if you look at the Eurostat methodology, you can estimate the global market for any substance, but here we have just the trend in the total. And what happens is that from 2011 to 2023, the price, the market, so the increase for high drug policy, head of the drug distribution is 39%. So in this case, it is higher than inflation. So the organization can have more gain from the policy. And I think we are in the end, because this is what Alice Rep can have on corruption from a survey of prison, in prison for low work in black market. And you see here, I just put the figures. The first one is for Italy, the second one is for Germany. And there was asked what kind of benefit they can have by bribing, so low corruption. And it's quite different from German to Italy, because in Italy you have more than 10 possibilities, in Germany just 5. And Italy is known that is one of the most corrupted EU countries. And in particular, the highest value for Italy is that, say, possibility to remain in the market. This means, and we have from journal and from newspaper, that the policeman who try to take this person, in some sense, are corrupted and allowed to continue to work. This is essentially. Now, okay, thank you very much. There are many references, because we have worked a lot on corruption. And here are the table that were reported just on the left, because the table is more less clear. But here are the total work estimated the incidents in prison, the prosecution from police, and there are the percentages obtained to stop drug seller. And here there is another one. Okay, here is that was represented in the price per dose of cocaine, etc. There are also the other substances. And here is the market estimate for different substances, but I just use the total that for understand how much the market was extended in that period. That's
So we are not preaching to convert, and so you are really welcome to give your contribution, questions, contributions.
Experience.
That's you now, I think.
This last graph was in billions of euros, or I couldn't really understand the last
What?
graph, the last table.
Fammi vedere.
The prices of the drugs.
Yes, the market, yes.
This table 3,
No.
Table 3, yes.
this one.
Yes, what is it? Is
Okay,
it
this one is the estimate per billion provided by the Eurostat group. So in Italy we have the National Italian Institute, Statistical Institute, and here is just a summary that is valuable. And we have the different substances, and a lot is other.
Yes.
Because here we have the classic substances, and I simply evaluate the total evaluation from 12.7 to 17.2.
Yes. This is the global or Italian market?
This is the global,
Global market, thank you.
because
Billions
there are
euros.
just few substances published. You see, there are a lot of other.
But this is for Italy.
No, global.
This is for Italy, no, this is for
Yes.
But similar you find in other countries of the EU, because they use all the same methodology, that is a Eurostat methodology. And if you want to know what kind of methodology, then I can explain.
Yes.
It's not my favorite methodology, because this methodology underestimate.
So you think the market size is
Is
double, or what is your educated
not double.
guess?
Yes, I use another method, but the increase can be obtained also by lower estimate if they are more or less methodology correct.
I don't want to dominate the time if anyone else has got a question, but I've got a question about the question about what the benefit is from policing. That's extraordinary. I've never seen anything like that before. It's amazing.
Benefit.
Yeah, the benefit for the corruption to the individual. You know, and the comparison between Italy and Germany. I would love to see that for every country.
No, we know that Italy and Germany are different because from other works.
But the access to get that data is extraordinary.
The access was a very big Alice rep.
A big what, sorry?
There were many countries working in Alice rep.
Right.
I just I was a consultant, and they had many different surveys, and many drugs were also analyzed. But these were surveys by question to sellers in prison, and this also make further consideration that persons in prison are not protected from the higher, okay?
Yeah.
Because there is, for instance, in Italy, we found that if you look at addicted in prison, half are in prison because they sell, but half because they have some low acquisitive crime. That means that they need to make this crime to have money to buy drugs. And so we had a lot of interview. Also, I can't remember the other, in 3 countries, and the 3 countries is the Italy that is the most corrupt, and Germany in the law, but there is, forse in Slovenia, there is another one in the middle, that here you have a pentagram, here you have almost come si dice cerchio?
Circles.
A circle.
Because of the many possibilities.
But the other is in the middle. I think it's Slovenia.
I think this is fascinating. It's
Yeah.
superb.
Unfortunately, I put the link here to the project, but you can't find that. But I have all the interview in jail.
Yeah.
Thank you for this panel. The topic of corruption, very interesting. I wanted to point out that I more clearly understand what's motivation, psychological, individual ways for higher corruption thinking. What you told us, the stories, how the people are acting and reacting to the system they're in. And thank you for the data, for the analysis. My question to the panel is, how is it, or do you see it the same? You pointed out, I guess it was, you said, interesting that the money, the prices, the price development of the illicit market is getting higher, the more effective the prohibition is. So that is torpedoing the system in itself. The corruption is getting even higher, you told us. So how do you get this separated? Do you have a solution to this problem? Thank you.
Well, indeed, the increase in the price, in the dose price, is not very high, because this means that a lot of drug is sold. And there is no, no efficacy from control and police, control.
We had lots of blatant cases in Italy, really I can tell you in private, crazy stories, but many years ago I read that in Germany they have 8,000, long time ago, 8,000 prisoners for drugs, so the country is much bigger than Italy, and in Italy I got almost as double, and then there were for financial crimes, it was as much as drug offenders in prisons, and we had only 150 for fiscal crimes. And imagine that you have so many people not paying taxes, not doing anything, etc., which is totally crazy. Probably is a bit reduced, but still I don't see many white-collar crimes offenders in Italian jails. What about that?
No, this is something that is clear for me. I have some other publication on corruption. And I put in the book also that in Italy we can see high corruption just looking at the newspaper when you find that someone died in a work ambiente.
Working, just a work.
Yes, and that there is corruption at high level of agency that have the work and give the work to small agency and so on. So there is non ci sono I mezzi di difesa degli operai.
No protection for
No
the
protection
workers.
for the worker. So this is something that you find in newspaper, and I put here some example. but it's not today.
Can I add a little note, a small note? Since the end of our abstract is the undermining of the rule of law and in particular the public trust in institutions, and the case, for instance, in Italy is under something called Operation Scuole Sicure, Safe Schools, where police enters schools with dogs. They have the students line up, their rucksack lined up. They check the rucksack, and if they find some smell, they can even search. In one case, in a small town near Biella, a female student, was found with, I think, in her bra, some grass, some hashish, I don't know. But because of that, she felt so ashamed that she dropped off school. And this is just one case, but there is one from 10 years, 12 years ago, where a student was at home. Her mother was concerned because she knew that he was using drugs. The police, I think Guardia di Finanza, came in the home and he jumped off he died because of that. So this is something that concerns me a lot because it's violations of fundamental rights that are stated in the Constitution and in the Human Rights Charter.
You make the point about corruption growing, and it is growing. And I'm repeating a few things I'll be saying again later on at a side event at 4:30 today about the intersection with the climate crisis. And the fact is, corruption is growing. But one of the reasons that corruption is growing is because police are so good at what they do. This is the problem. Police are very busy within the drug markets. They're good at arresting people. They're good at seizing drugs. But the size of the market stays the same. So what is the police do? If the police are having no impact on the size of the market, what are the police doing? Well, they're changing the shape of that market. And part of that changing shape is growing efficiency. Because if you're constantly chipping away at the periphery of a business, that business becomes more efficient. And that's what's happened to transnational organised crime. Supply routes have shortened, that monopolies have formed. And where monopolies have formed, that means that the people who control substantial parts of the wealth in that market have increased their disposable income. And when organised crime increased their disposable income, they always invested in corruption, like always. So corruption, therefore, is a growing threat as a response to police activity. So it's a grim, very grim irony indeed, that actually the activities of how we task our law enforcement with drugs is directly leading to an increase in the overall threat of corruption.
It's like pruning a tree.
Pruning a tree, I love that analogy. I'm going to steal that.
Okay.
That's very good. But yes, it is. If you want a big healthy tree, you clip the dead bits off, don't you? Yeah.
Even with marijuana.
Yeah.
Anyway, the higher corruption is also reported in the book and can be evaluated at country level using the GNP. And Italy is all just in the time where Draghi was at the government, but then our countries is always very low with respect to many others in Europe. But Germany in the last year, but for other reasons.
Yeah, this is very important. I mean, in 1981, Andreatta, the Italian Minister of Economy, when he was told, well, Italy's economy is very low, he contested, no, you have underrated our GNP, because there is a 20% of our GNP that is the byproduct of illegal activities. And that's how Italy was admitted to the G7 in 1981. So, and it was Andreatta that was the one who invented Prodi as a politician. So it was not auto-rinforza. This is meaningful.
I read once McCoy is very famous for writing about CIA, heroin, etc. Then one of the last books, there was just one comment about Italy. It was a mix of bandits and Nazi criminals. It's not a mafia, it's an undercover mafia. I was really puzzled by that expression, undercover mafia. Something strange and really a bit scary.
Indeed, every year there is something inside the Italian National Institute of Statistics saying the cover economy, and the bigger part is drug, almost drug.
Black economy.
Yeah.
Well, it is in the.
And this is
the-
estimated so much lower than the real.
It is counted in the gross domestic product.
Yeah.
So,
Good question there.
Yes. So I have a question about the benefits, about that I see the most common, which is freedom to operate. Does this include also the possibility to have a sort of a guarantee of a monopoly in a certain market, let's say, like in a certain area of the town? Because I think there are cases in Italy of police that...
It's like
Yeah.
one of the last things see on the newspaper in Milan.
It's not only the last thing, there are many cases in
Yes,
Italy
yes, many
where
cases,
the
but
police was...
recently Rogoredo.
Yeah, explain what happened. Very few, it's a very heavy debate about the federal referenda because the government wants to put the judges under the executive. That's a real reason of this referenda. Anyway, but it's very curious because end of January, a group of policemen arrives in the open scene, which is quite big in Milan, close to Milan. So lots of people with disorders go there, but it's really a huge supermarket for drugs. So the staff of these people policeman goes on the spot, the one which is not in his own terms, comes also in the spot, and shoots a drug dealer, pretending self-defense. They put up, it was just very shortly the justice started to investigate a bit, and the government, I stay with the police. 1, 2, 3, the three leading party secretaries say, we stay with the police, we stand by the police. And then immediately after, we found out that the pistol was manipulated only by the policeman. It was DNA, proofs, etc. He was asking all the money, 200 euro each and 5 grams of cocaine each dealer, and sometimes discriminating the black ones, so according to his rules, and making other crimes. So that means, but it's more or less clear it was like that. So that means that everybody who gets into the scene can get and profit from that. Because he was immediately also covered by his colleagues, but then they had to say, no, it was not like that, he really killed him cold blood. But it's just one example. There was during COVID, a group of policemen showing the money, they had about 50 cars each, etc. And then, okay.
No, I have a question because I think the message is clear because the approach is wrong. So you see distortion in the society. It's a lot of people in the jail, and you cannot. You see the numbers, so it's a chaos. In the end, it's a chaos, no resolution. So the first, let's say, statement by, let's say, our movement from Brazil, we work with the cannabis. The approach is different. It's not a drug; it's a medicine, and we have a lot of patients. So my statement, first of all, our statement is that maybe Michel Foucault is already resolved this problem when you've changed the approach from moral judgment, more or less, to ethics. So this, I think, is the base of the solution for all of this. But how to mitigate a negative impact in the society? The first question. I think we more or less know the message. And how to create a restorative or restoration measures for the people that were impacted. Because some people are in the jail, they could not be there. And others, they lost their life, problems in the family, money, work, jobs, and in the end, what was the problem? The approach. So it was not a crime. So in a lot of people that goes to the jail, goes because it's a consequence, because the life is difficult, no job, no food, so they have to go to the narcos. So it's a distortion in the end. So I think our question is how to mitigate this and the measures to restore a good life for the people that were impacted. So do you have any kind of approach for this question?
No, but I think there were many in the UN, lots of years, they have friends like Transform proposing just scaling up a kind of regulation, which doesn't mean that everything will be available Legalization means to have even cannabis. Sometimes friends in Italy, they discuss, oh no, I have liberalization of legalization. When you get some tomatoes in your own garden, you can put even some poison in it. It's up to you. And so that's liberalization. Legalizations mean you couldn't, when you sell tomatoes, it's supposedly legal tomatoes that you're not poisoning anybody. It's the same with cannabis and other drugs. So we can scale up that first with some, in many cases it was very efficient what they did in Switzerland, take away heroin. We had a fantastic meeting with John Marks prescribing heroin, cocaine, and keeping the people quite normal. And then if you decided to quit, you are very stabilized in a social position to do that. But not if you're really homeless and staying on the streets. Even alcohol, if you drink alcohol and champagne because you're rich, probably don't have the problem of being drinking booze all the day. So I think we have to get off that, because 50% of the Italian inmates, only not indirectly but also indirectly, are connected to this torture machine, you know. So that is, we have to get rid of that. But then in the meanwhile, we have to reestablish a welfare system, because as an example now in the US, you can tell me much better you that there is a crashing the economy, like also in Scotland partially probably. It's crashing the economy, putting the prescription, doctors don't care for the patients, everything is a mess if you don't have a welfare system. And in Europe we are inspired by the national health system of UK, but it went down. So I think that is a bit, we have to go along with social justice in general, not only drugs. Might be not even so important, but in this context they become a tragedy because they related to that, and so in a war economy will be worse, etc. So we have to be careful to that. And I don't know, it's now in Italy there is a lot of movement of harm reduction people. They are a bit, maybe my critique is a bit, they don't are not believing that politics will help them out, the political parties a bit. There is some differences, but if the citizens themselves don't take the initiative, it's quite. The few examples in northern Italy, Venice, which was lots of hard drugs around, but there is quite a good counter reaction of the population, which is not always the case, because they tend to increase this penal populism, which is also quite strong in Europe, to punish somebody. It's typical of the crisis, that sometimes the people go on for revenging themselves to other marginal groups. But I don't know if I gave you the answer, actually. It's really open to us.
Anyway, it's useful to study how the use of drugs or alcohol start in adolescence. There are 2 chapters here. And this is what you have to do. Good prevention, not the prevention now that they are doing. Maybe someone do good prevention, but usually the prevention done by the government is not useful to avoid that adolescent try and start using. So something very important is to study what kind of prevention and to use very, very soon. And for instance, a person starting early to use drug are persons that have something that is difficult from psychology. We have here that many have no good rapport with the father or the mother or both. This should be used to avoid to have very problematic use. So you have to study how they start using.
Maybe his point is about the people who were impacted also by the penal system. Yeah.
Including comprising our.
This is a point, well, this is not a matter of penal policies, it's a matter probably of social welfare or welfare policies. It's a matter of rehabilitation, professional training, the possibility of starting a different life. But the first step, of course, should be that of decriminalizing, so that they are not impacted. The second step should be for people who are out of jail, should be that of having really a chance to go back to society, to restore the social fabric. But insofar as they think, or the dominant attitude is that of excluding, the in and out logic, saying someone must be excluded for good, and so they sort of try to sketch out and to develop these devices that leaves people afloat, particularly marginal people, inside the penal system. That would be very hard to do. Probably the point is that nowadays there is we are facing two options. One is keeping them into the legal system for good in various different systems, and abolish the legal system. Yeah, but in the middle between the penal and the non-penal, there is a social aspect that we should take care of. This is an important part that is being neglected. You need for sure to deploy manifold interventions focused in that direction.
Don't you think the root of the problem is the standards, the approach, like punishment approach? And the standards itself, if you look this, for us it's clear because it's a very Western-based standard. If you look at this, and if you change the approach to a more vast, let's say, view of this, maybe we can move forward, because if you look, the answer came by yourself when you say community. The answer is the social problem, the psychological. The guy, the person is connected with its own reality. So if you have no community standards to protect the environment, the individual is lost. So he's going to find, she's going to find the way to survive.
Yeah,
then the way to survive can be.
I agree with you, but I think we're not going to have a just future without legal regulation. But it's important who designs that legal regulation. And it needs to be, at least in part, designed by the people most affected by the current injustice.
Because behind this, you have drug as a problem, as a negative thing. Because when you see this as a solution, when you see this as a medicine, when you see this as part of a natural part of our life, because cocaine, heroin is a distortion. Because you have to look at the plant behind this, the coca leaf. It's not a drug, it's a solution. So if you want, what is continuing in this direction of the Western model with, let's say, fear behind of something's bad, people will try to escape and to find a way to survive in that world, very aggressive. If you change the perspective and this is a good thing, it's part of a community, you have a plant, that is not a problem, it's a solution. So we change the mindset and you live with that, it's part of the real life. Imagine a different way.
I agree with you, and you put that very well, actually. But I think the two approaches have to sit side by side, so we have to bring the systematic change and fit that philosophy within it. Because unless you have the structural change, unless you have legal access to commodities, you can't adopt that philosophy alongside it.
I think you are coming from this darkness to something lighter, and I think this is a good place for this transition phase to dialogue, to create a new thing. Otherwise, you're going to keep the cycle. I think it's a problem for the people that work with this matter, because they lose their jobs when we change the world for a more peaceful world.
True.
So, yeah.
Grazie, thank you for all, and we see you around. If you have questions, can privately.